My name is Demirkan. Today, I'm so happy that we're coming together to celebrate our philanthropic contributions as a community. I feel very honored to be a part of the Turkish Philanthropy Fund's virtual benefit. I believe in the power of education in making a difference in the future of the next generations and grateful that TPF is putting it in the center of its efforts through today's program. I'm also grateful for all of you who have tuned into the program today from your homes. What I'd like to do today is to give you a break. This is for all of you out there. Thank you for your support, care, compassion, and humanity.
Göğsüme yaslanmış, yeni daldım uykuya. Şafak süzülürken odana, güneş düşmüş saçlarına. İlk defa bu sabah paramparça hayatım bir bütün. Sadece bir gece seninle eksiksizim. Yok olup gitsem de sonumu görsem, ölümü tatsam da yenilmem. Yine de yitip gitsem, sonumu bilsem, ölümü tatsam da yenilmem. Yine de senin için bütün zaferlerim. Sessizce yanından, yeni güne karıştım. Nefesin havada altın tuzu, yabancıyım bu duyguya. Bu sabah huzurlu, sakin kayıp ruhum. Dün gece hayatta seninle yeniden doğdum. Yok olup gitsem de sonumu görsem, ölümü tatsam da yenilmem. Yine de yitip gitsem, sonumu bilsem, ölümü tatsam da yenilmem. Yok olup gitsem, sonumu görsem, ölümü tatsam da yenilmem. Yine de yitip gitsem, sonumu bilsem, ölümü tatsam da yenilmem. Yine de senin için bütün zaferlerim. Olup gitsem de sonumu görsem, ölümü tatsam da yenilmem. Yine de yitip gitsem, sonumu görsem, ölümü tatsam da yenilmem. Yok olup gitsem, sonumu görsem, ölümü tatsam da yenilmem. Yine de yitip gitsem, sonumu bilsem, ölümü tatsam da yenilmem. Yine de senin için bütün zaferlerim. Zamanla tanırsın insanları, gider hayallerin birer birer. Gerçeği görüp nefreti tadarsın zamanla. Günler geçer saymazsın, sonu yokmuş gibi yaşarsın. Geceler mezar olur dalarsın uykuya. Nefes al nefes ver, nefes al nefes ver, nefes al nefes ver. Gün olur her şey biter. Bu adam gitti gider. Yorgun argın usulca buradan göçer. Kırgın üzgün bu adam gitti gider. Yorgun argın usulca buradan göçer. Çocukken kurduğun hayaller tükenir gider birer birer. Ne bir umut kalır ne de keyif zamanla. Eskiyen bir saat gibi aynı yönde dönüp duran, 24 saatte bir vuran aynı noktaya. Nefes al nefes ver, nefes al nefes ver, nefes al nefes ver. Gün olur her şey biter. Bu adam gitti gider. Yorgun argın usulca buradan göçer. Kırgın üzgün bu adam gitti gider. Yorgun argın usulca buradan göçer. Düşelim cennetten yeryüzü oyununa. Kanalım sarhoşken şu aşkın yalanına. Gireceksek girelim, gel kız günaha. Öleceksek ölelim şimdi şuracıkta. Yağmura, buluta, yıldıza, aya, kara toprağa düşen yaprağa sor. Var mı aşktan öte? Nemli saçlarına, nefes nefesine, şu çırılçıplak çıplak kıvrılan birine sor. Var mı aşktan öte? Varsa sen söyle. Düşelim cennetten yeryüzü yalanına. Girelim sarhoşken şu aşkın koynuna. Gireceksek girelim, gel kız günaha. Öleceksek ölelim şimdi şuracıkta. Yağmura, buluta, yıldıza, aya, kara toprağa düşen yaprağa sor. Var mı aşktan öte? Nemli saçlarına, nefes nefesine, şu çırılçıplak kıvrılan beline sor. Var mı aşktan öte? Varsa sen söyle. Buluta, yıldıza, aya, kara toprağa düşen yaprağa sor. Var mı aşktan öte? Nemli saçlarına, nefes nefesine, şu çırılçıplak kıvrılan beline sor. Var mı aşktan öte? Varsa sen söyle. Yağmura, buluta, yıldıza, aya, kara toprağa düşen yaprağa sor. Var mı aşktan öte? Nemli saçlarına, nefes nefesine, şu çırılçıplak kıvrılan beline sor. Var mı aşktan öte? Varsa sen söyle. Var mı aşktan öte? Varsa sen söyle.
It's been an honor for me to be able to join you with my music today and lend my support to today's program to raise awareness around equity and equality in education. If there is any silver lining to what has happened over the last year is that it has brought us closer as a community, thanks to the efforts of Turkish philanthropy funds. And for this, I am grateful. I'll now turn it to Julida Ateş to kick off the official program. I especially look forward to the panel discussion around EdTech and philanthropy to understand the best ways to allocate our philanthropic resources to support education in the most impactful way. Once again, sincere thanks to Turkish Philanthropy Funds for bringing all of us together.
Thank you, Demir. It is always a pleasure to listen to your wonderful music. Good afternoon and good evening. İyi günler, iyi akşamlar. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Julida Ateş, Turkish Philanthropy Fund's ambassador, and I will be your master of ceremonies during today's program. Welcome to Turkish Philanthropy Fund's Color Turkey Winter 2021 panel and auction. If you're new to Turkish Philanthropy Funds, TPF is the leading U.S. community foundation for high-impact social investments dedicated to Turkish and Turkish-American communities. TPF exists because a group of people came together to imagine a platform that encourages the aspirations of individuals, families, and companies that want their philanthropy to make a lasting impact. Today is about our community of donors and our NGO partners, all of whom contribute to TPF's success. Together we ignite the power to imagine the power to dream, and the power to see how working together creates a better community for everyone. That's why we want to begin today's program in gratitude. We hope our gratitude can reach all of you watching us online. Our gratitude to the pioneers of TPF for their vision. Our gratitude to our founders, society members for their continued support. Our gratitude to each one of you for being here today. Your generosity has allowed TPF to raise more than $43 million since 2007 and has enabled us to grant out $2 million in the last year, even in the middle of a pandemic, to our partners who are transforming lives every day in significant ways. And at TPF, we know we can do more. I know you're coming here today after a year of being online nonstop, from Zoom meetings to remote work and online schooling. This was an unprecedented year, and all of us have been impacted by our current circumstances. We also know that not all have been affected equally. Research shows that the current crisis is widening gaps in education, which is still the strongest pathway to economic mobility. And this inequality has long-lasting effects on intergenerational wealth and opportunity. So we want to use today's event to bring light to education and discuss how we can close the educational opportunity and achievement gaps together. We say together because all of us here have the opportunity to shape and impact lives. Think of that. Imagine what might happen if each of us goes back to our lives after today's program with a renewed commitment to education, to philanthropy. I hope you will see, hear, and experience a program that will inspire you today. Before I turn to TPF's chairman, I'd like to remind you that we have an online auction going on. You must all have received emails and text messages by now. I'd like to invite you all to bid on the auction before the end of the program today. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you again for giving forward through TPF by being here. We have a terrific program for you, and now I will turn it to TPF's chairman, Mehmet Kırdar, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Julide. It's been a great pleasure having you as an ambassador of TPF for all these years. I personally have fond memories of our time together in New York a few years back when we got to ring the closing bell at the NASDAQ in honor of TPF, not that long ago. Today, I'm truly delighted to welcome you all on behalf of the board of directors and staff of Turkish Philanthropy Funds for an important conversation and a timely one affecting us all today. Turkish Philanthropy Funds was founded over 14 years ago, thanks to the vision and generosity of a group of individuals here in the US. They believed then, as they still do now, that there was tremendous good that could be done by engaging more people in building a community of philanthropists dedicated to important unmet needs, whether in Turkey or of importance to Turkish communities around the world. Today, we recognize how these forward thinkers have shaped our success to this point and how their work positioned us for what we hope will be a vibrant future. As we look at how far we've come, we celebrate our progress towards fulfilling our founder Haldun Taşman's vision of serving a community of dedicated, passionate philanthropists and partners. Yet we know we have a lot more work to do, as the need is growing in many places, especially over the last year. The past year has had an unimaginable impact in many ways. Now more than ever, the needs in our community are being felt more deeply. On the other side, there are more of us who are eager to help, which is great. As we reflect on what we need to do more, we've deeply touched and inspired a lot of people to provide genuine acts of kindness that we've seen in our everyday community over the last year. The COVID-19 Community Relief Fund, the Elazığ Earthquake Relief Fund, and the Izmir Earthquake Fund are only some of the ways that your generosity through TPF has connected our community and demonstrated the impact we can have through your involvement. Today, this program's continuation, and today's program is a continuation of our efforts to bring our community together around philanthropy. It's hard to imagine what life was like over a century ago during outbreaks when we have an expansive online universe today. Even as the coronavirus forced us into physical isolation, spectacular technological advances of the digital age make local and global connections possible. But because of the vast digital divide, the pandemic is intensifying inequality in education and excluding many youth from their right to learn. That's what today's panel will concentrate on in a timely manner. I'm sure today's discussion will not only advance our knowledge, but inspire us to think deeper about the impact of educational gaps on our communities, especially on young people. I'd really like to also take this opportunity to extend a special thanks to all of our sponsors, especially our pioneer sponsor, Haldun Taşman. Your contributions are truly invaluable to TPF. We thank you for all your support and all the support of all of our other sponsors today to create a better community for everyone. We're thankful to everybody's continued partnership in helping TPF and our communities. While we know there's much more work to be done, we're proud that TPF is playing an important role in bringing us all together for events like today's to give, to help, and to hopefully heal. One more time, my heartfelt thanks to everybody involved in making today's event possible, including our development committee and our event committee, as well as our staff and sponsors for today's events. Without you, this would not have been possible. We hope we'll inspire you today and look forward to what our panel of experts in this area have to say around the areas of technology and education in today's challenging world. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy our event.
In America, a lot of kids have an opportunity to go to a school one way or another. That's not so true in Turkey. My name is Nick Porcaro, and I'm a retired architect. My wife is Turkish, and I wanted to give back in some way. My father-in-law believed very much in helping needy children. And how better can you help a needy child than to put him into a good school?
Nick established the school in Çaykışla, that's an earthquake-affected area. That was a cause very close to his heart too, because the school was named after his father-in-law.
I wanted to use my skills, so I wanted to design it and build it and, manage the construction. Now, how do I put all of this together?
TPF is an organization that is building a community of philanthropists, connecting NGOs in Turkey with donors in the United States.
TPF's mission is to really connect you to the issues and challenges that people are facing on the ground in Turkey, such as education, gender issues, economic development, and arts and culture, and bringing us practical information about them.
The existing school was very run down. I realized that some of the kids probably lost their mother or father or both of them during the earthquake. So I got kind of bonded to the children, and I decided that this would be the school. Then TPF comes in. They would not only be an entity to deposit money, but they would be a sounding board, and I would get advice from them. The school got built, and it got built in record time. The state organized a groundbreaking ceremony. Families came out, and all the children were there. There must have been 200 people. Village families that send their children to this school have told me that they don't worry about them when they get to school. They feel that they're in a safe place. This could not be done without TPF. They're a completely transparent organization. You can look at their books. They're very open about what they do.
They take the time to discuss with you what your needs are or what your priorities are, and they really take the time to match you with the appropriate programs.
Because they understand the arena, particularly in Turkey. They understand what can be done, what can more easily be done, what is maybe more difficult to do. And they have a network of people that they can access.
Philanthropy really used to be something that only the very rich did. And TPF has really created a network and a platform where you can give back regardless of who you are in incremental ways.
I really think that TPF fosters the individual connections that you have with your community. You can be as involved as you want.
It's about empowering individuals who are connected to Turkey and allowing them to be empowered to do something about it on their own.
I never thought I would get so much bonded to these kids. All I know is that there's no greater reward personally to yourself by knowing that you've done something for someone else.
Good afternoon to those of you in the United States, and good evening to our guests joining us today from Turkey. As the chair of the Development Committee, I'd like to welcome you also to our Color Turkey Winter 2021 panel and auction. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us here today. Your support makes TPF possible, and your presence makes today meaningful. I also would like to express my sincere appreciation to the members of our Development Committee, who generously helped to make this event come together. Special thanks to Özlenen Kalaf, Seren Müdürlüoğlu Triyan, Zeynep Oğuz Bilimer, and Alp Önalan. Thank you. While it has been a year marred with many challenges in education systems all around the world, by necessity innovations and new approaches have emerged out of turmoil. They are presenting real opportunities to transform education worldwide. Thus, we have decided to bring together the experts in this field to discuss how we as TPF take lead in closing the equality and equity gap in education. I will now turn to Zeynep Oğuz Bilimer to introduce our esteemed panelists.
Good afternoon. It is my privilege to introduce you to our Color Turkey events. Today's panel is EdTech and Philanthropy, Crafting the Future. When the pandemic hit last year in March, many of our schools quickly turned to existing platforms, tools, and technologies for distance learning. But even in the best resourced and highest performing education systems, most responses ended up privileging better off children. Students from households with faster internet connections, higher levels of parental education, and greater availability of parental time for engagement have had much better success with distance learning, while others were left behind. The challenges have been even greater at the elementary school level, as the digital platforms were typically developed for secondary and higher education and work better with older students who can navigate them more independently. And in countries like Turkey, slower or more limited internet connectivity and not enough computers have presented an especially stark challenge. In the wake of a once unimaginable health crisis, we believe innovation in education can lead us to a more inclusive future. Today's panel will delve into how we can rethink the paradigm of education through the lens of technology to close the gap. We are fortunate to have a wide range of speakers from different arenas: K through 12 education, philanthropy, business, medicine, and higher education. We believe it is these collective efforts and these experts' thoughts on best practices that will bring us closer to equality. Our moderator, Deborah Quazzo, is not only a prolific investor in education, but a force of change and creative inspiration for education innovators across the United States. She's the co-founder of the ASU and GSV Summit, which is described by the New York Times as the must-attend event for a global community of educators, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and investors who want to transform the education ecosystem. Deborah will be joined by Eren Bali, Gülay Barbarosoğlu, Ahmet Bozer, Steve Selezno, Sarper Taşkıran, and of course, Haldun Taşman, our founder. I'm certain we will all be inspired by them, and I'm hopeful, as always, that we will continue the conversations we start here today well beyond this event. I want to thank all of the panelists for their time and commitment to TPF. Now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Deborah.
Hello, I'm Deborah Quazzo. I am the co-founder of the ASU GSV Summit, which my firm GSV does in partnership with Arizona State University. We've been partnering on this event for 12 years. It celebrates innovation in education globally. And I'm also the managing partner of GSV Ventures, a venture fund focused solely on investment in digital education companies all over the world. I'm thrilled to be here today and really appreciate the opportunity that the Turkish Philanthropy Funds has given all of us to gather to talk about philanthropy and EdTech and what it looks like for the future and what we've just come through with COVID. To quickly give you a sense, the Turkish Philanthropy Funds works to inspire and mobilize innovative, high-impact philanthropy that benefits communities in Turkey and in the US. Education is one of the areas that TPF invests in greatly. TPF believes that education is a human right for all throughout life, and that access must be matched by quality. TPF targets both equity and equality in education with the projects it supports. Its goals range from advancing policy building capacities of educators and trainers, empowering and mobilizing youth, and investing in educational infrastructure. Very much aligned with the mantras of GSV and the ASU GSV Summit. Thrilled to be here. I'm also here today with an extraordinary panel of experts from across the EdTech and philanthropic world, and I'm going to let them quickly introduce themselves, starting with Aaron.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm Aaron Bali. I'm the founder and CEO of Udemy, which is one of the largest online education platforms in the world. And then also more recently started a healthcare company, Carbon Health, which is now which is a tech-enabled healthcare provider, and especially with the during the COVID pandemic has been in the front lines of the pandemic. And our goal was to build a platform where any expert around the world can teach an online course and create a community around learning, because we believe that for people who have the motivation, the drive, but lack the opportunity, one of the best ways to improve your lives, like usually when you and Udemy has been a very successful company in that we had in 10 years, I guess, we now have around 50 million students, more than 50,000 instructors around the world. It's a very global platform. And I think also it's like really accelerated innovation. I mean, it also, I think, led to several other companies do interesting things in the field. So it almost became like a trigger of a new era of online education companies. I'm very proud. And also, I now I'm out in the healthcare space as well. I'm doing my CEO job, more time in healthcare right now. But so it's actually, but there's a lot of commonalities, which is like education and healthcare are some of the most essential things that you want to make as accessible as humanly possible. So I feel like even though I went from education to healthcare, it's just was continuation of the same mission.
It's great to be here. Great to see this, meet this wonderful panel. I'm Ahmed Bozer. I'm a retired executive. My longest time was with the Coca-Cola company, which I retired from in 2016. Deborah has given us a lot of credit saying we are experts in philanthropy and education. I have to say that I'm an expert in none of them, but I'm an aspiring philanthropist, let's say, who has a passion for education. I'm also a board member of Turkish philanthropy funds, and it's for me, it's the platform for me to do satisfy my charitable goals, both in the U.S. and in Turkey. And I'm just very happy to be with this great panelists to learn together, to contribute together, to understand how technology and philanthropy can provide this basic human right to all.
Good morning, I'm Steve Selesnow. I'm the president and CEO of the Arizona Community Foundation. We're the largest foundation in Arizona. We manage over $1 billion in charitable assets for Arizonans and companies and families throughout the state. And we invest in all things that might improve community life, especially education. Prior to serving as CEO, I was the Deputy Director of U.S. Programs and Education for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And in that job, I was responsible for executing our strategy in states and districts and education networks around the country. Much of that had to do with technology at the time, although it wasn't where it is today. But the early part of my career, I was a teacher, I was a principal and a superintendent of large urban districts on the East Coast. And so I'll try to combine all of that into the conversation today. And I want to thank Hal Tashman and Turkish Philanthropy Funds. I have a very special feeling for TPF because as it launched, we helped manage its assets in the beginning days. So we're really proud of what TPF has become. So glad to be here.
I am Haldun Taşman, business background. I'm really a product of a good education. I was fortunate to have great teachers and attend very good schools. But my life has been mostly in business. We started in Arizona as a small privately held company doing medical devices in the US, and then grew and became a global company with automotive and electronics in Asia, went public in Singapore, and then in Europe, we were also doing in Ireland medical devices. In 2005, we sold the company, my partner and I, and the involvement with Arizona State and education started a little bit earlier than that, but I have been always a student wanting to be learning, thirst for learning. And I have learned a lot from what GSV and ASU have done. I've learned since Arizona Community Foundation was here in Arizona, and I was fortunate to be a board member and learn a lot about philanthropy. So since 2005, I've been really involved in various forms of we have another foundation in my hometown in Bolu, Turkey. So I'll talk about that later, but I'm really very excited to be here to share some of our experiences and learn from each other.
Hi, I'm Sarpar Tashkuran. I'm a senior child and adolescent psychiatrist, currently living in New York, and I work at Child Mind Institute. I am very passionate about education, but at heart, I'm an educator and also a clinician. So I started my journey in Ankara, Turkey, where I went to medical school, and then I completed my residency training at Yale University in New Haven. After that, I worked at NYU. I was a fellow to learn more about child and adolescent mental health and brain development and how brain development informs mental health and problems and risks that come with it. And then I moved back to Turkey to do my public service, and I worked at community hospitals in Bursa, where I worked with a very traumatized population, worked with individuals who were victims of abuse and trauma, and had some experience in how it affected their growth and development. And then I wore my educational hat again, and I worked with Koç University, where I started the psychiatry department there, especially with an emphasis in child and adolescent psychiatry. I moved back to the United States 3 years ago, and I've been working at Child Mind Institute ever since. Child Mind has a clinical side in which I see patients, I touch young lives and inform them, and also help them and support them as they go through various mental health struggles. But we also do have a philanthropic side as well. And we do community outreach and school outreach here at Child Mind as well. I'm very honored and privileged to be included in this distinguished panel, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I'm very pleased and honored to be here with you. I'm Gülay Barbarosoğlu, a professor of industrial engineering. I have spent almost all my life in higher education system and as an academician at Boğaziçi University. Having completing my tenure and mission as the president of Boğaziçi University in 2016, I decided to make a change in my professional life, and I moved to K-12 education system, because I always believe that higher education and K-12 education are highly interdependent, and we educators should work hard to eliminate borders in between. Currently, I am the founder's representative and the general director of Hisar School, which is founded by Hisar Educational, bilingual, well-regarded, progressive school. With pandemic, thanks to our readiness and agility, our transformation to remote learning has been very quick, and we have been able to navigate uncertainty by developing a very dynamic and flexible program. As it is obvious, throughout my career, I have been observing the digital transformation in education. And the last year has been a year like no other before, a quantum leap, a digital leap forward. So I think we will all be talking about this today. Well, once again, thank you so much for your kind invitation, and I look forward to a lively discussion today.
Terrific. Thank you all. A wonderful set of diverse backgrounds to reflect on kind of these issues. Let me start with COVID, where we all obviously still sit. Basically, the pandemic pushed, roughly 1.6 billion learners into what we like to characterize as the deep end of the online learning pool, really almost overnight. As we look around, as we like to characterize it, some people swam to the edge of the pool, got out, and may never come back. Some swam quite well, and others sadly sank, which would include most of the most vulnerable populations, really comprising the latter group. I'd love for each of you kind of comes at this quite differently. Can you reflect on the impact of COVID on the delivery of education, whether it's K-12, higher education, or even workforce learning? Both the obvious, they're both good and bad. There are obviously many negative issues have been raised in the media and the press and in real life, but there's also been a silver lining in it. So I don't know who wants to start, but I would love to get each of your reflections on the topic. Steve, do you want to start?
Sure. I think it's a really important question. We would never have planned to take the whole world to go global with virtual learning the way this rolled out. And if we were planning to do this, we would have spent years and probably tens of millions of dollars to create the plans to do this, to avoid all the problems that we experienced. And unfortunately, we were forced I'm typically thinking about the nation, but I'd say, since this is a more international discussion, the world, we went into this totally unprepared. And for those who had already been migrating to virtual learning, if that's what we call it, they had a distinct advantage because they had worked through all the difficulties and problems to engage children in smart and thoughtful and appropriate learning opportunities through an online system. And they figured out how to build the, if you will, the infrastructure around that to make that work. Because the technology, as we know, changed time and place for learning. And the question was, how did you manage that? How did you build quality in that and those experiences? Well, we didn't have that for large parts of the population. And so naturally, those that had advantages, Deborah, as you were speaking about, essentially had a head start and an opportunity to build and to have access and quality and a managed instructional experience. But for many, many kids, they didn't. So what I worry about today, and I saw this from my vantage point across, the fifth largest city in America, Phoenix, Arizona, and then across rural areas across the state of Arizona and within tribal nations. There are 21 of them in Arizona, which probably suffered the most. So the real question for us right now is, we know we have platforms that work and can work really well. We don't have the infrastructure to ensure accessibility for everyone. But I'm really concerned about the massive amount of learning loss. Yes. And that our system that we built and held on to, I'd say, unfortunately, for decades and decades, is a graded system. And COVID blew that graded system apart. And to think if we're going to bring children back into first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, all the way up to 12th grade, that's not going to work. So the existing structure that is what is everybody's normal is not an appropriate solution for the learning loss. And the real question is, how do we deal with learning loss? And how do we deal with those issues of access and equity when we now know we can combine the two in a meaningful way? And what will it cost to do it?
Dead on. Learning losses was my next question. But it is. I mean, you have. I mean, Steve, given your purview and your history, do you come out and just this whole issue of the role of philanthropy in government? Do you come out with some optimism? I mean, I think the learning loss is going to be devastating, and I don't think anyone has any, appreciation for how serious it's going to be. I mean, do you have an optimism coming out of it though?
Well, as an educator, lifelong educator, you have to be eternally optimistic. You have to believe we can, and I think there are people and places figuring this out. And we need to make sure we can disseminate the best models and plans to do it. I think there are many districts, school districts, and even some charter networks that don't have the wherewithal to plan it, figure it out. There are some who really do and have already are doing it and adapt really quickly, which is what makes them so successful. And we need to figure out a way to help others who are struggling with determining the design of the future and how to get it in place quickly. We need to determine how we can help them. Philanthropy can shape and influence and catalyze great ideas. We just can't implement them at scale very well. And I know that from my experience at the Gates Foundation, where we had the money to do things at scale, but even that was a drop in the bucket. So we have to be thoughtful too about the assets that are arrayed to help either school districts or charter networks or schools of any kind, frankly, anywhere in the world to have access to the best designs and the best expertise to try to create these plans. I mean, ultimately, everyone's going to get vaccinated and we're going to come back to some new normal, but it cannot be, we can't march kids back into what they left last March.
Amen. Sarver, do you call on you because coming at it, I think in the mix of all this too, are the mental health issues that have risen precipitously by all accounts. Curious for your reflection on the same topic.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, the physical health aspect is obviously takes precedence right now when people are discussing death tolls and the need for intensive care units, but the rising mental health burden is something that's less discussed, but it's really important for childhood and adolescence. We're seeing numbers that I have not seen since I started working as a psychiatrist in this country. The rates of hospitalization for mental health reasons, for depression, for suicidality, just lack of social contact and the social isolation and the burden that it puts on children, it has been surmountable. So there is that, there is so much repair that needs to be done. And I completely agree with Steve that it would be naive to just put the kids back at school and expect that everything is back to normal. This is a time that, adolescence is a time of opportunity, but it's also a time of risk as well. And kids need social recognition, social praise, and be rewarded by their peer relationships and recognition by teachers as well. And although I know I've worked with a lot of teachers and they did their absolute best to make sure that they deliver the content they're supposed to deliver to kids, unfortunately the education became dry and devoid of that human fabric that it needs. So it left students disinterested in learning, especially higher levels of learning that we need to give them at this, opportune time in their lives. So there is a big educational loss, plus the mental health aspect is really scary. The incidence rates of depression, incidence rates of anxiety disorders, such as generalized or social anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorders have all increased. The rates of mental health related hospitalizations have increased, even despite COVID. And these parents are really scared to hospitalize their kids, but their lives are at stake. And also, there is this big problem of attentional disorders that kids and teens are really struggling to keep their attention, to sustain it enough to get what they need from the online platforms have risen so much. So that is something that definitely needs to be incorporated in whatever comes next after COVID.
Well, it certainly amplifies the need for mental health issues to be more directly addressed in school settings, right? I think there's got to be more measurement around the mental health of students and classrooms and schools and teachers for that matter. It's going to be a lot to recover from. In your roles in the work you've done in philanthropy, do you have, in particular, your focus on educational philanthropies? Have you seen, have you sort of seen the impacts of COVID and have a reflection on kind of what COVID has, how it has impacted educational delivery in the work that you've done?
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. Most of my philanthropy for this 1 to 12 education has been in Turkey. My philanthropy for higher education has been here in the US. I think what COVID has done is it really has been almost like a mirror to us, showing all the problems in our education and in our societal structures in a very clear way. And as Steve had said, sort of caught us unprepared. I think one of the things it disclosed was this chasm between the privileged and the underprivileged. I'm now talking specifically in Turkey, and maybe it applies here as well. Although, it was mentioned that access to technology has been a problem. So the NGOs that I worked with there noticed that there was a pretty clear difference between private schools versus public schools. Private schools were able to get up to speed on technology. They already have parents who are maybe more better users of technology, whereas public schools were much slower. It got even worse when the chasm was between cities and villages. What became so obvious was the importance of the ecosystem of education in a small village, for example. So it's the families, it's the chief of the village, and the students, and the teachers who have their own challenges being in small villages teaching there. So this, there was big differences between how different parts of the education system adapted to COVID. But I'd like to remain an optimist, because now we're talking about things like that. This is being talked about everywhere. So it was like this new change, the whole system had to adapt to. Obviously, first go around, it's going to be a lot of mishaps. And then we're going to learn from that, and we're going to be more effective users of technology. And hopefully we're going to equalize a little bit more. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in the rest of the panel.
Yes, good.
Deborah.
I was going to say you as the founder of one of the education technology's first unicorns, a company worth over $1 billion, which is an amazing accomplishment, and serving over 50 million students. Love to hear your reflection on really, and now you sit with a foot in both education and healthcare, so it's an awfully interesting perch. love to hear your reflection on the COVID impact.
Sure. Yeah, I think aside from education at Carbon, we are working with a lot of education institutions to kind of get them. We try to safely reopen them, and we advise somewhere around 100 schools on the healthcare topics. So I think there are a couple thoughts. One is I'll go into the negative piece a little bit, and then want to focus on the silver lining here. So as everybody knows, like this impacted different socioeconomic classes like differently, and obviously, if when you go to more under-resourced areas, became even more under-resourced. But I think that what we have observed is the even bigger harm was that a lot of families like now like have lost their jobs, and like now you have parents who are losing jobs, already fighting poverty. It's essentially the students who did not necessarily have a kind of stable, robust like family situation end up having an even much worse situation. So education was in a way also like an escape for people who are growing up in challenging families to at least have some time where, I mean, with both the negatives or positives, it was actually like it was helpful that they were slightly like kind of away from their families a little bit. They had opportunities to express themselves in other areas. So essentially, I think aside from the socioeconomic situation, I mean, anybody who has like especially grown up in a developing country like knows that like if you have parents who are struggling themselves, like so it really affects the children. But then when the children can no longer escape from that, it actually will like put them further behind. So I think in the silver lining, so even though I'm coming from the digital healthcare, digital education world, so I think it was great that we learned that just like changing the format of education from physical to digital is not necessarily good. Like it's not like digital everything is not necessarily good for physical everything. So education, we are now realizing that education has a lot of other critical impacts the public education particularly than just purely like delivering content, right? Because if it was just about delivering content, digital would always be better. But we know that it's not. There's all the other things that education provides. And I think the big, so one positive is now that we had to push the entire country kind of overnight, they were able to get kind of just get over their fears, anxiety about some of these topics. My hunch is like whatever has worked well is gonna stick for pure content delivery purposes. Like as an example, most public schools won't have access to best teachers, especially more specialized subjects. So delivering those things more centrally. So if a high school kid wants to learn advanced mathematics and there's nobody in their school, like being like letting them get access to that, those type of centralized subjects, I think are going to be very critical. So I was actually born in a very small village that Haldun was talking about. My primary school, my mother was a teacher, was the teacher in the whole area. So she was rotating between 8 grades. There were literally, she was the only school for 8 different grades of teacher in the middle of a military kind of conflict in the region. So I think similar challenges happen even in urban cities sometimes. So I think whatever is working well, like the centralized content delivery, maybe public government can actually support it. Private companies can like offer these courses, and it can really supplement education as relevant. But the other silver lining I've seen is when you just force instant digitization, you also realize technology's role is not just digitizing the delivery of education. There are a lot of other problems like content, curriculum design, about like tracking students, about like essentially there's all those peripheral technology tools which were really underdeveloped like for no reason. So now we are realizing, okay, we don't necessarily want 100% of education to be delivered digitally, because the physical contact and the social construct also has a very critical place in development of children. But there's a ton of other things where technology could have made a huge impact that we did not really even pay attention to. I think now I'm seeing dozens of companies like noticing these issues, because their kids are being homeschooled and they realize all the other problems, and a lot more kind of engineers, product people are working on education and healthcare, which, I mean, in healthcare, without a question, had to me, like in my mind, this will be a huge net positive in terms of like people's lifespan, quality of the healthcare, because the development in biotech and healthcare delivery that we have gotten in the last like 1 year is going to like just impact the next 50 years of healthcare outcomes. I think similarly, a lot of the challenges we saw, like the solutions will actually help our kids. I mean, a couple of generations of kids definitely had a education gap, but I think when sometimes you highlight the problem to more people at the same moment, it really just has a magical impact in future of innovation.
Great. Hal, let me get you to comment. I would also add, just in thinking about, a lot of us have an association with Arizona State University, and certainly you do, Hal, have been deeply involved there. And I think they are one of the, Steve as well, one of the great examples of someone who jumped in the pool and swam and set an Olympic record because they've been so assertive in their innovation around digital delivery and blended, both pure digital and blended, and they're doing it in K-12, and they're doing it through ASU Prep and in higher ed, obviously, and then as well in the workforce now with their other. So I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, Hal, in your comments, but
yes, there is definitely loss of learning, loss of jobs, mental issues. But the other side is that there are many things I think individuals, we learned as individuals about cleanliness. A lot of families spent more time with each other. And then this COVID accelerated the development of online learning that opens so many different opportunities. Being close to ASU, I think ASU is leading the way. This Dreamscape is a immersive launch. They launched a partnership with Hollywood executives, with IMAX, and I think Walt Disney and a lot of others on this virtual reality learning. So this technology, I think, is going to help the customization. At ASU, Michael Crow, president, talks about different modalities of learning. It is really pushed them, and the school has been open. Last year, they graduated over 10,000 students, and they are doing testing. The school opened again this last week. So everything is relative, and I'm seeing, like for Turkey, a lot of hope for adapting some of this technology that is going to benefit different levels. I am involved with early childhood education in my hometown. We did about 10 years ago, working with the Ministry of Education, the university there, and this foundation, Bolu Community Foundation, which is the first community foundation in Turkey. They raised the participation rate of kids, preschools, from 5% in 10 years to 95%, which is the highest in any city in Turkey. So it's showing people, I think, what can be done. And now they're asking for new technologies. How can they improve the quality? They have improved the quantity, but quality now, and they're able to do it. But in Turkey, from what I see, the ranking of internet speed is number 88. In the US, we're number 7 in world rankings. So there is some impediments relative to using online technologies that can be adapted in Turkey. But I'm really fascinated with the benefits that it taught us, our vulnerabilities. And I've lost several years in my life when I look back, but gained other things as a result of it. In the overall scheme of things, I think we'll be able to make up.
Certainly, it was inevitable to close schools to slow down the epidemic and protect our children. But we know that school closures disrupted their learning process. Some students around the world moved to distance learning that the schools quickly implemented to remain connected. But many, particularly those from the most marginalized groups, didn't have access to digital learning sources. And they lacked support, they lacked resistance and engagement to learn on their own. So how COVID impacted the education is a broad question, and I am afraid there is no single answer. The answer and the level of optimism depends on the country, the district, the school, the student, and the family relations. Well, of course, as you have already mentioned, there are learning losses and mental health issues, but I'm more on the optimistic side. And I believe that during pandemic, we have been forced to rethink education and we have learned a lot. So now I just want to mention about some of the lessons learned that should be reflected upon our current education system. Well, obviously, we are kind of outsourcing information processing to computers and machines. That means increased digital literacy and competence is required for all stakeholders in the system, for students, for teachers, for parents, for the families. Well, students, of course, are the key recipients of education, and their school experience today and their professional life is being shaped. So today, we have to provide them with the skills and competences so that they can navigate the digital challenges successfully. Yes, it's true that students use digital devices every day, that's for sure. But there is more to digital competence than messaging and using social media. As PISA results show, students spend more time online, but most likely as passive users of entertainment. And PISA also shows that there is a strong correlation between the social background of the students and their digital competences. I think it's a very important result. And of course, that brings us to the question of digital infrastructure, the internet access, Wi-Fi access, the needed hardware and software, both at the schools and at the homes. And accessibility, access to digital infrastructure brings along a broader issue of social inclusion and justice. So students with only limited or no access to digital infrastructure have been excluded from the digital world, from the education system during the pandemic. So possible disadvantages and possible losses should be compensated immediately. Of course, all these changes also affect teacher education, and they transform the teacher's role into a knowledge facilitator. So in this process and in future, we should work hard to improve the digital competence, digital confidence, and the mindset of teachers by providing professional development activities. So I think we have to redesign, we have to create a new culture of teaching and learning, and we have to get rid of all the traditional methods. So the long-term curriculum, the content of our education should be reviewed and renewed. And certainly upskilling and reskilling will be needed immediately after the pandemic as well. Well, my last words in this part will be about the business world, about the business sector and the labor market. This digital transformation and the pandemic on top of that have been changing the business sector and the labor market in a number of ways, as work organization, employer-employee relations, communication, collaboration, and indeed employment and labor regulations. Well, if such changes are taking place in the business world, and all these changes and challenges should also influence today's education and the new design of the education system.
That's great. That's great. And I know we've touched on this in different ways, but just would love to dive a little deeper on the question of the digital divide between upper and lower classes that we've really seen around the world. Certainly we've seen here in the US, and Steve talked about a little bit in terms of school systems getting both devices and bandwidth access to particularly low income populations. I'm curious, as you all think about your roles as philanthropists or entrepreneurs or medical professionals, et cetera, what do you think? I mean, do you believe there'll be an active global philanthropic movement? I mean, because it's such a fun, and is sort of equitable access to the internet, which is what we're really talking about. Is equitable access to the internet, a right that every world citizen should have, and do you have any optimism that there's going to be organizing amongst philanthropies and government entities and corporations to sort of solve this, because it seems like a pretty base level thing that needs to be fixed, and in order for us to sort of move the ball, continue to move the ball forward on innovative ways of delivering digital education. Steve, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think you can see episodic collaborations among major philanthropies, and so you'll see them come together on particular issues for a particular project. And so you'll see the large ones like Hewlett, Ford, and Kellogg, or Gates and 3 other major foundations. But to expect that philanthropy across the board would come together on a single issue, I don't have a lot of hope that would happen. And I think you can see it now because philanthropies are determining, how they allocate their resources and to what priorities they feel they need to address. So for example, you can look at Ford Foundation's singular focus on race and equity right now. They've always had it, but they doubled down, and they did some really creative financing to create even more capital they could invest in that. Now, we might argue that the way to get to solving the problems of inequity is through the question that you asked, Deborah, about closing the digital divide. I might suggest that that's a way to get at equity and inequity, but maybe not so much from their perspective. So I think we'll see collaborations, but I don't think we'll see some unifying force around this. Inequity in education has been a problem for a long time. The digital divide, everybody has known about. Everybody's talked about it for decades. Yet we never really addressed the problems of inequity over those times. So yet we expected when COVID hit that everybody would adapt and we'll solve this problem by creating hotspots, in neighborhoods. That's not a solution. So I think philanthropy, even in its idiosyncratic fashion, around what their charters are, what their boards expect, what their founding funders expect. I think there's space for different approaches, which I think philanthropy can lend, but a unified focus strategy globally. I'd love to see it, but I unfortunately, I can't imagine it. I'd like to be more optimistic.
Yeah, there must be some governments doing it right, Singapore or somebody like that. But
Yes. Yeah, I've been reading a lot about them. And they, the culture that, and here's the other factor, why can Singapore do it? There are some cultural factors about, and regulatory factors about Singapore that don't exist in some other places. And that enable them to get some things done that are pretty incredible. And so I think that leads to the idiosyncrasy of how you approach it based on the context of where you're trying to do it.
Aaron, do you
Yes, let me take it from the Singapore angle, because I've been there several times, and Udemy has a very big government partnership there. I think 30% of Singapore working adults are learning skills on Udemy funded by the government. So they've definitely always been the most innovative government. I mean, some people argue they can do this because they're small, but the reality is like larger companies have more budget as well. It's all about your GDP per capita. So, and this is interesting because I have been thinking about how to bring some of these best practices from Singapore to Turkey, because I think they are doing something really interesting. So, for example, like every year, like when I go there, the government defines certain set of skills which are deemed the most strategic skills for the country. Like this year, I think it was data analysis has been the critical thing. Data science has been critical for 10 years in their agendas. They've been investing in manufacturing 2.0. They've been investing in kind of more streamlined like finance, and like there's all those kind of fields. And it's a kind of relatively heavy-handed approach for United States. I actually don't think that approach could ever work in United States, but Turkey actually is used to having centralized education. So it wouldn't be as much of a culture shock in Turkey versus US. So I think one of the things that is becoming now clear is, first of all, it normally sounds ridiculous that when we focus our philanthropy, we focus on giving people internet access and computing, right? Because when they have much more essential needs like access to food or like healthcare, so it feels like those should have been priority problems. But on the other hand, like giving people access to connectivity, computing, internet, that is actually the most effective way to let them change their socioeconomic situation. I mean, in my village, like it was so behind it, like we had access to electric like 30 years like after like rest of the country. But now when I go there, everybody has smartphones, everybody has connectivity, and that's like a lot of people who don't even have a strong education, they can find jobs because they have that connectivity, right? People can text and WhatsApp them, and they can show up in a place and they make money, and their children like actually like gets a small lift. I think the economic advantage of connectivity is actually very big. So I think it's not just the education. I think we should actually even when the budget is tight, I think we should actually prioritize giving everybody internet access, because that's the fastest way to kind of build more kind of sustainable changes in their situation. And I think like Singapore, I mean, in 2009, they put up all this broadband internet. They came to us like very early on because they had this massive internet network, and they said, but we don't have anything to use it with. Like we would love to, I mean, they just seek content providers, and they just like funded a lot of them. And if you go to Singapore's education institute, like which runs all the education system, it looks just like a Silicon Valley tech company. Even from the office, you enter this, the logo is like cute, and their website is great. They have SG.government application, education application, which is very well designed. So they've also been really good at attracting some of the most talented people who normally work in private industry along into the government institutions. So I think like they have, I mean, it's not like everything they do is perfect, right? So you can argue, like you can definitely argue certain free speech issues there. But like the way they run education, I think has to be an example. I think like a lot of people talk about Finland and Nordic countries a lot, but what I've seen is like like what Singapore has done is probably unmatched.
Yes, I can concur. It's been, and I think importantly, the lesson in Singapore is you can transform your GDP per capita quickly if you actually educate your entire population. Their GDP per capita rose, rose, was one of the fastest rising stories in the world, really driven by the power of education. So we're actually, if you think about connectivity and mental health and telehealth, which has also been a big pandemic, has had great pandemic tailwinds. I guess not unlike digital education, teleeducation. You want to comment on that and what you've seen in terms of efficacy and in that kind of in the having connectivity and does that help? Has that helped at all in these conditions?
Well, it was an interesting experience. I can speak about my own journey, and having practiced in Turkey and then moving back to the States, I carried some of my patients, and I was already conducting Skype or other platform sessions, and I was kind of used to providing telepsychiatry service. But when this hit, I was at an advantage, but I saw how my colleagues really struggled. Because especially in our line of work in psychiatry, you need that certain the fabric of human interaction and to establish that connectivity. And it was really difficult to establish that through an online platform. But we saw from this example that's I guess silver lining, going back to Ren's point, is people are resilient and people can adapt, and kids certainly faster than we do. So it's definitely something doable. I think it is really important to bridge that gap between the underserved populations and people who have more access to healthcare. And if this can be done in psychiatry, which is one of the areas of the health system which requires direct contact, it can certainly be done in other areas as well. And especially monitoring the mental health of youth, and just being able to have a pulse on how they're doing in terms of their not only mental health disorders, but how they're emoting in general, how they're regulating their emotion, how they're socializing, what are they doing in order to be inspired and be stimulated, and having a technological platform to have me access to reach those kids was essential. So I think that this has taught us a very valuable lesson. I don't think that there's any way that we're going to go back from this. Now we get into now, because and there's a different perspective in people as well. I'm based in New York, and I used to get calls from my city and maybe the tri-state area, but now I'm getting calls from California, Arizona, from Texas, from Maine, to be seen and evaluated. And they say that what does it matter if I'm in Maine versus I'm in New York or California? The thing is that we still have a lot of state regulations, licensure restrictions, and those have to be looked at in order for this system to work more efficiently. There are rules that have been in place for good reason, but now some of them needs to be reviewed and altered if we want to have a new chapter in health and mental health delivery.
That's really analogous to digital learning delivery too. Higher education institutions have had to lobby like crazy to remove antiquated rules that basically prevented or overregulated or regulated the wrong things in the delivery of digital education, particularly degree oriented across state lines. Hal or Amit, do you guys want to comment on the digital divide piece?
Yes. I would like to say a few things on what I have learned just recently. I'm a believer in early childhood education from what I have seen. This landmark study, Chicago Nobel Prize winner James Heckman.
Jim Heckman, yep.
Landmark study that it proved that it's not, several generations, 100 some Black African American students were in the 60s, about 137 of them were sent to this preschool and then followed. And then I think in 2019, a follow-up showed that even their grandchildren were not in poverty. They were doing well. They had good jobs, higher employment rates, and better health, longer life. So one of the drivers, I believe, is this preschool education and whatever can be done digitally to help the teacher education in that area to make it more effective. I think it is very powerful. Another development that I want to mention is Mackenzie Bezos she's giving billions of dollars to universities, higher education institutions that are not in the first tier, but I think philanthropy needs to help those areas, the community foundation, community colleges and other schools that don't have the financial means. I think the best form of philanthropy, in my belief, is providing jobs, giving people jobs. And the digital opportunities is doing that in many ways, and will improve further with the institutions that are leading the way, like ASU, in the future. That I think education will be enhanced, and then jobs will go to those countries wherever the talent is. In some situations, the talent wants to leave the country if the country is not suitable for them to exercise their talents. So I'm hearing, like in Turkey, 80% of young people want to work outside of Turkey, but I think that will change in the future. But it's fluid. It makes things, jobs, very fluid. Outsourcing jobs. It used to be manufacturing, but now other kinds of works becomes worldwide. The market becomes very fluid.
Ahmet, you have something? Yeah.
Yeah, Deborah, I'll just make a very quick build on what has been said. Digital divide is probably going to be closed before the economic divide is. And as Steve had said, it's, I don't see a sort of a massive global movement to do that quickly, but it is happening, it's closing, it's moving forward. What I would like to say, though, is that I think there's another lever we can focus on to help alleviate the effects of that, and that is the power of the NGOs with the startup mentality. So those are the ones that I've been involved in. Just I'll throw you an example, and if you can imagine, just hundreds and thousands of these kinds of smaller startup NGOs, passionate about a cause and have the ability to make a difference. If they're supported, I think we can approach the problem from that side. One of them, which is based in London now, it was originated in Turkey, a company called Twin. I was a grantor to them initially, but then they turned themselves into a business because they got so successful in doing what they're doing. So it's now an international business. What they're doing is, if they've designed this incredible science kit, which once they get that science kit to a small village, and kids can start playing with it and learn and etc. And when they realized there was an internet in some of these villages, they've quickly designed one that doesn't require internet, and they just continued doing it. The examples of that are many. In fact, every ones that I'm working on is of that example. One of them specifically identified a problem. They said, this was in Turkey again. They said the underprivileged populations have especially have special problems in science and math. And so they actually put together this very targeted program, and they've executed it in a very targeted way to address it. So the only point I just want to make and add to what's been said on the digital divide is maybe let's think about leveraging these smaller startup-minded NGOs and how they can go around the problem and solve it.
That's great. Inserting entrepreneurship into philanthropic. Yeah. I'm a big believer in that.
Well, about a global philanthropic movement. It's not an easy question, so I will be sharing my personal opinion about this. On one hand, this period has clearly showed the many benefits that students gain from being in school, being with their teachers, being with their friends, and benefiting from the variety of services that schools offer. And this public awareness of the importance of schools and of teachers can help to further engagement and support from communities, NGOs, and maybe companies for schools. So on one hand, there might be some boost in the philanthropic efforts. However, digital divide or educational divide is the result of a bigger social, economic, and cultural issue, which is also dependent on human development and wealth distribution in a nation. And today we know that COVID has simply increased the systemic inequities that already existed. It's wishful thinking and that this disruption, this pandemic, will present an opportunity to rebuild our education systems with equity at heart. And I hope the pandemic is already inviting engagement and action by civil society for schools and the education system. So I'm not very optimistic about a global philanthropic movement just because of the size of the problem. Now, let's consider Turkey. There are more than 20 million students in the pre-K-12 system and more than 70,000 schools. And considering the economic development of different regions in the country, we know that a significant group, especially in the rural areas, are well underserved. And they have been disproportionately negatively impacted. So the problem is so big, and the magnitude of the problem is demotivating and eroding social consciousness and social responsibility. Well, we of course agree that we have to strengthen education as a common and public good and as the basic child right. And certain foundations and NGOs, have large-scale projects in place, but a nationwide solution is needed with clear leadership and targeted support from the policymakers and from the government.
We are coming up on the end of our session, which has been terrific. I'd like to ask you all to kind of reflect on one last question. The word impact is full of meaning and probably full of ambiguity too. I think lots of people measure, define impact in different ways, and you can define it philanthropically, commercially, professionally, etc. I'd love for each of you to perhaps just reflect on how you think of impact in your own either professional life or in your philanthropic work, how you measure it in and whether COVID has changed your perspective on it. Because it's certainly been a regrounding, I think, for most of us. Hal, do you want to start?
Brings at my age level, brings a lot of our friends for some common projects we become, even our friendship becomes tighter. So there is a phase in everyone's life. I think this kind of searching for meaning in one's life through philanthropy, and there is definitely entrepreneurship is involved in it, and lots of social being aware of the problems. But it's been a really very good period in my life, looking at learning and trying to do some things that have meaning by giving time. I think impact, to me, it is not just providing the funds, but giving your time. So being involved with these projects for many, many years and adjusting along the way and bringing in context and other resources for it to achieve success. So that's what I've learned, and I believe in providing time.
So Harper, flip to you. How has this period adjusted your thinking as it related to your own impact?
I mean, when I think about philanthropy and impact, it's it stems from a benevolent altruism, right? So it's the intention of creating well-being of others, and it's inherently a selfless act. So you're not necessarily bound by you don't need that reward or fulfillment, but at the same time, I think it's really essential that we find out a way to objectively measure the impact, because just doing good for the sake of it is important, but also making sure that that's sustainable and making sure that that's generalizable is really important. So from my perspective, when I am with my own patients, it has changed the way that I see myself as a person who sits in an office, as opposed to now I can reach out to people and people in their homes. It gave me more hope about outreach. It gave me more hope about touching other communities, even distant communities. As a Turkish citizen who is living abroad, it gave me more hope to reach out to Turkey and touch lives there more efficiently and effectively. And the underlying technology and developing tools to measure that impact will make sure that as we try to embark our journeys for philanthropy, we're doing the right thing as when we're guided by those measurements of impact.
Great. Steve, you want to, actually, Aaron, I think you may have raised your hand first. Missed you. You want to go?
So I think for me, impact is the type of words that every single person, I think they have, or actually every person does have. So, and I sometimes would almost be annoyed with when tech entrepreneurs say like they think about their impact in a very as indirect way as possible. So I wrote the software which helped these other groups to do things, which helped this thing, and eventually it sounds like their work had just massive impact. But in reality, the real impact is done by the people who are actually doing the work, right? So if you make the job of teachers a little bit easier, and let's say they can teach more people, like at the end of the day, still the impact is done by the teachers in my mind. So it's actually not the right thing to do, take credit for the entire like kind of second, third order consequences of what you do. But I think in the last 1 year for me, the biggest change in this has been this idea of like having more direct impact. So we have been in the front lines of COVID. And instead of just writing software and things like that, which we have done as well, this time we decided to just go to the underserved communities directly. We went to we went to towns where there were 25% positivity rate. I spent all like yesterday working with the LA Fire Department to build a system in LA to vaccinate 1 million people every month. And the problem is like the cities cannot set up the technology systems that quickly. We have been working, like our entire team has been working like 7 days, 12 hours since December, because we realized that local governments were given zero help from federal government or even states on this. And we realized that like, I didn't even have to tell our team what to do. Like they just literally, everybody started building things, and we've been working in actual warp speed. And I think what I've seen is just like when you're purely on the software side doing something that's kind of like the easier part of the bigger project, and you claim the impact of the entire outcome of it is probably unfair. And I think a lot of the time, like companies can actually go far more directly and do things on the ground, because like what the rest of the world needs is not just a piece of software. Sometimes it's actually like some like scalable thinking is. I mean, there's actually more we can provide than that's just software. So I think I really enjoyed being more directly impactful in this kind of critical problems, and our team has been a fanatic supporter of this. Actually, like you hire, I think you automatically attract the best people where your impact is more direct, more immediately visible.
It's great.
Well, talking about the impact, my initial observations on the pandemic turned out to be very short-sighted. A year ago, I couldn't have predicted that we would be still talking about the COVID uncertainty in 2021. I thought we will be back to our normal life after just a few weeks of strict compliance. So the impact is very widespread and huge. And COVID, the pandemic, has affected every aspect of human life and revealed human and social vulnerabilities. And it's most difficult to predict the aftershocks of the pandemic today. And I think it will take years to erase the negative effects of social, economic, and mental problems. But in the meantime, of course, it has also surfaced extraordinary human resourcefulness and potential, and has given us an opportunity to rethink how we live, how we communicate, how we work, and how we educate, so that we can be stronger when the pandemic is gone. So the definition of impact is quite difficult. Given all these thoughts, the identification and the measurement of multi-layered impact, I think it will become a big research issue, not only for medical and life sciences, but also for different fields of social science. And I hope there will be very, very inspiring researches being conducted in this field. Just to wrap up, so far we have all discussed education and we discussed impact. Now I just want to connect these two words, these two concepts. We educators believe that youth represents the present and future wealth of our nations. And today's youth and today's students will become the leaders of tomorrow. As the late US President Franklin Roosevelt stated so correctly, I love his statement, we cannot always build the future of our youth, but we can build our youth for the future. So I strongly believe that the education is the only solid and valid policy that impacts the future of our nations. So if we wish to create a positive impact in society, we have to support education. I think that that's going to be my last verse.
Steve, you want to?
Yeah, the impact, it's always a vexing question, and I struggle with it a lot. And I think philanthropy does too. There's unfortunately a lot of impact assessment has also suffered from false precision. And so we need to be careful about what we measure and how we measure. But I think whatever we're designing, we ought to have Dr. Taskaran at the table and others from his profession. And mental and emotional health is often always favored by people, but never thought through at the beginning of the design phase. And I think having people like Sarper at the table at the beginning is really important. And I'll tell you why. And it relates to your question, Deborah, about impact. I saw something I hadn't seen over the last year. And, we make grants every day, all the time, 8 to 10,000 grants a year. That's a lot of grants, and we get thanked all the time. And I don't want to minimize the thank yous we get as a philanthropy, but this time was different. We had set up, to Amit's point about the nonprofit sector, we had set up, they faced an existential threat, and we set up like most community foundations did everywhere, a community response fund to help address that existential threat that nonprofits were facing, to keep them afloat. And then we started helping municipalities distribute relief funding to small businesses. The idea that to keep neighborhoods vital and functioning, and people employed, and people able to get goods and services within their own neighborhoods, to keep that neighborhood economic system functioning, we started distributing relief funds to small businesses. And small businesses, nobody ever gives them money. Nobody ever, nonprofits are used to getting a check, right? And but for-profits are not, without strings attached and without other compensation along with it. And what we saw was, and these checks were not big, 5,000 to 25,000 mostly, to some larger, but it was the psychic reward, the psycho-emotional response that we saw that I'd never seen before, of people running businesses, either for-profit or nonprofit, feeling that their community was behind them. So the size of the check actually didn't matter. What mattered was that their community cared and was giving them support to stay afloat and alive and continue to do the work that was so vital to the health of their communities. And so I think the impact in this was the knowledge of that people actually cared for each other. And it, you know, we went through all this strife over whether you wear a mask or not, as if it's some political question, not a question about what was good for the community. So I think what I saw was the impact of sustaining community good, the common good, which has really been frayed through COVID. And I think that impact is hard to measure, but it's really important. And I would say we shouldn't forget that in terms of what we're looking at, what we're trying to measure, and how we ought to be thinking about these factors at the beginning of a new design, not at the end.
That's great. Do you want to close us out with your thinking on impact?
Yeah. Thanks, Deborah. I guess philosophically, I think impact is all we can think about, because we don't know the impact of our impact. Sometimes it could be great, sometimes it may not be. So, so the question for me has become, you know, what do I need to focus on about my impact? And I just thought about really two things. Obviously, as a philanthropist, your impact is always indirect. You know, to Aaron's point, obviously, you know, taking credit for what you do, that's a terrible thing in this sphere. So I definitely agree with that. But I think the indirect impact is as important as direct impact. And in making that, you know, collaboration skills come. It's almost like a twin of it, because if you really want to impact an ecosystem, so that ecosystem can continue to produce positive impact, who are you going to work with? You know, what kind of organizations are you going to work with, and how are you going to collaborate with them? Because that's how impact multiplies. You know, if you can bring together philanthropy with good NGOs, with the state and with other businesses. So I think it's more about thinking system-wide, looking at your impact goals and who is it that you can work with best to make those goals. And I found out that, when you really do that and when you find the right people, your impact can have a fairly large multiplier effect. And that's been my learning, and I'll keep looking for those opportunities.
That's great. Fantastic. Well, thank you. This has been an incredible conversation. Again, I want to thank the Turkish Philanthropy Funds for convening this illustrious group. And, we appreciate everybody's time. Thanks so much. Great commentary.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Steve. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Guys. All
Take
right.
care.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Deborah. That was such an insightful and inspiring panel. Wow. I honestly believe that's all the lift we all needed to stay motivated, knowing that we can make a difference in our communities. So I'd like to thank all of the panelists on behalf of TPF one more time for their valuable contributions to today's program. Thank you all so much. We all now understand that relying on connectivity for distance learning is not a panacea for school closures. And I sincerely hope that when we look back to 2020 from 10 years from now, we'll remember this moment as a time where we push our education systems to find new and more effective ways to deal with equality and equity in education, so we can tackle the tail, meaning the bottom of the learning pyramid. And that's what's really going to make the difference. And as TPF, we promise to work with our partners on the ground to find and support these efforts and work with you so that your contributions to our communities not only personally satisfy you, but also make a long-term positive impact in our communities. With that, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Alfred Woodard from her preface to Robin Hood Was Right. Charity opens up the possibility of joy. The life of the giver, as well as that of the receiver, is transformed. No matter who we are, we can make a difference in the world around us. Giving is the responsibility and privilege of every man, woman, and child to participate in the task of building more just and humane societies. Philanthropy is a gift to oneself. Creating change is exciting. It is proof that we are alive and thinking, what could be better than to work for a future where fairness is the bottom line? Thank you all so much for being a part of TPF's community. You have given so much to TPF over the years that makes our work so meaningful. And thank you for showing up today and staying on until the end. We sincerely hope that we can all see you next year in a crowded ballroom. Back to you, Julie.
Thank you, Şenay. It was a great wrap to a very insightful panel. I'm so proud that I'm part of it, TPF community, an inspirational and generous group of people. And it has been an honor to be the master of ceremonies today. Today's panel discussion once again showed us that the grants TPF has made over the years are more than numbers. These grants are about people, students, and families. They're about making a difference. There are a lot of uncertainties going on in education, a lot of social challenges that limit opportunities to many. And many people in our communities, despite wanting to do something, do not feel like they can participate in problem solving meaningfully. TPF is an opportunity to do that, to participate in making a difference in people's lives. I hope many of you, if you haven't done so, will join TPF's movement and invite your friends and their networks as well. Please check our TPF's website at www.tpffund.org. to learn about different ways you can join our efforts, from opening a donor advice to starting giving circle or giving directly to campaigns. And on that note, I want to thank every single person who is watching right now. One more time, you showed up to support TPF's work. It means so much to all of us at TPF. We hope you had a wonderful afternoon. Please think about us and talk about us, and please bid in the silent auction. We hope to see you in person next year. For those of you with exclusive access pass to chat rooms with our panelists, we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.